Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon. Good morning to me. Nice to be here.
Yes, very happy to have you here and very honored to have a chance to interview you today and get inspired, as it is Inspirational Monday at Future Now.
Well, I'm happy to be as inspiring as I can. I love founders and entrepreneurs. It runs through my veins, so I'm happy to share some of my life experiences. And as she said earlier, let's start the grilling.
Okay. One question before we go to the fundraising question. So I was reading your bio and there was this thing written on the top, which says that you are one of 3 or 4 co-founders at MapQuest. So how does it work if it's 3 or 4 co-founders? Why is it so?
Well, it's a great question. And the interesting thing about MapQuest was it was not a typical internet startup like we would all imagine today. The genesis of MapQuest came out of an existing mapping company that had been around for 20 years previous to MapQuest. And a group of us in that company kind of started working on the elements of kind of digital mapping a number of years before MapQuest, eventually launching MapQuest, the product, as we started to spin that out of the big company that we were part of. So the genesis isn't your typical kind of 3 guys in a garage idea, raise money and go, we had to kind of spin it out. We had an existing company. We were a whole bunch of map geeks, back in the 90s. And so, and I say that because there's lots of people responsible and I don't want to limit it to 1 or 2 or 3 people. So I say 3 or 4 so that people ask the same exact question that you just asked. And I can tell people that it was a unique beginning.
I can see. Well, yeah, you got me there, right? I mean, that was the first thing I noticed in the first line. Well, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's stay personal, actually, when it comes to investments. So what are your personal investment preferences, and or what are like the technologies you're looking at and betting on for the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. Most, if not all of my investments are very much at what I would call the seed level and have been for 10 years. And to that end, the things that are driving, there's so little information at that stage that I find that what I do is I'm more focused on the people and the team because there's so much discovery still to happen about product market fit, which you guys talked about a couple of weeks ago, and how to start scaling up your company. There's so much more journey left and unknowns that I want to see that I can find a person or a team that has a mindset that thinks similarly to me about how to attack that journey. And so I find the initial screen for me is about getting really excited about a person or a team, more so than a technology or a sector or an industry.
I see. Okay, well, that's interesting, right? Because that's sounds like a cliche. Everyone says that a VC business is a people's business and you're betting on people. And then, there is this question, how do you actually recognize these people? I've read some of your blogs on, testing the leaders and telling a lot on leaders, but how do you actually see that, over the few meetings you have, or how, do you reference these people, or is it just your personal feeling? And how do you actually make this assessment when talking to founders?
Sure. Well, I'm a storyteller and a story listener, so I want to spend a lot of time with people. Personal, business, having lots of different conversations. And what I'm trying to see is what makes you tick? How do you think about things? What is your approach? To the point that there's so few answers and so few data at the seed level of investing, I want to understand your approach. I want to understand, do you like to get lots of advice? Or do you kind of operate as if you have all the exact answers right now? And I can only do that by just having lots and lots of discussions. I like to dive in. I like to be a partner. I don't lose sleep if you don't take my advice, but I at least want to have the discussion and kind of, beat it around and pull on it and tug and smash it and open it up and get lots of other people's opinions. And I think the best entrepreneurs, in my mindset, kind of love lots of information and then make decisions. And if we can hopefully help an entrepreneur make more better decisions and not wasting time or money, then we increase the chances of success. And so I can only get there by spending a lot of time and digging in. It's why I love the accelerator model, because it's based on spending, 3 months intensely in a pressure cooker, and I get to see how you think and how you act.
I can see. So that was actually my question. If, because they always say that VCs try to, not to bring the founders to too many meetings, make it as effective as possible and, not to give fake hopes and stuff. So, but with the accelerator, you actually have better opportunity to get to know the founder. So that's actually pretty good. Well, one of the questions, that you always hear from the founders is that, they are asking about the specific fundraising tips and, negotiations and things like this when it comes to investors. But from my perspective, there is a very little said and written on actually getting into this first meeting with an investor. Statistically, they say it's, 1 in 3 startups or founders actually, get invited to the first meeting with analysts and investment managers. So maybe be a little bit practical, what are the tips on actually approaching the investor like you, let's say? What are tips that you would share with our founders and the startups?
Terézia, that's my favorite question. And it's the thing that I get most excited about, because to me, it's the key to fundraising, but it's also the key to business and the key to life. And that is that I believe with every part of my soul that an important skill that most people have not developed or have not spent enough time on is this thing that we call networking, right? This thing where we go out and we connect with people. And most of us view it as a task, and it's not a fun task. But I really think that people are not thinking of it the right way. So let's apply networking to fundraising specifically, because that's obviously the nature of this question and this session here. To me, investors are like your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, your significant other. You have to develop a relationship over time, okay? And you don't usually get married on your first date, right? And investors to me are similar. And so it's very important that you develop a relationship and you kind of form this mind meld if you do. And back to the point of getting to know me, me getting to know you as an entrepreneur, you need to get to know me as an investor and understand whether my approach is in sync with yours. And I believe that every founder should spend somewhere between 5 and 30% of their time connecting with people, especially investors. Now, 5 represents if you've just raised money last month and you're good for the next 18 months, 5 means you can't turn it off to 0. As much as you maybe want to and you have other priorities, you always have to be cultivating relationships and new investors. And 30, and maybe some days it's even more, is when you're actually in your fundraising process. And now you're trying to harvest the relationships that you've built over the last weeks and months prior to your fundraising initiative. And so too many founders think of this as a light switch that you can just turn on or off. And I think you're not going to do well during that. You may get lucky once or twice, but in the long run, you have to develop these relationships prior to you needing the money. Let me end on this one more note, in that I have yet to see, and obviously there's exceptions way out the edges of this, but the gross majority of fundraising efforts, you're going to have to, speak with, 40 to 80 investors. And most first-time founders, right, their head blows up. And they think they can only, if they could just go pitch 3 or 4 and find one, maybe it operates different in your region on the Canary Islands, let's say. But in the rest of the world, as I've observed, you're going to have to speak with a lot of investors, which means that you always have to be on, and you always have to be creating that database, that list, that short list or whatever, and building relationships. And I think fundraising success is directly a factor of how many of those relationships you've cultivated up to that point.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it comes down again to people's business. However, it might be a bit difficult in these COVID times, right? I mean, networking. I know there is a lot of online events, but I think it's still slightly different. What is your experience with this?
I actually think this is, if not exactly today, as we roll forward, I think this is going to get better and easier. And maybe I'm the weird one in the group here, but here's what I'm thinking. Prior to COVID, most people needed to meet face-to-face, and most investors and founders would meet face-to-face, which means that if you needed to, if you were in Bucharest and you needed to go to London, right, you needed to go on an airplane, right? There is a geographic kind of phenomena happening, right, where most people were still operating under the kind of meet face-to-face. Well, we've blown that up, right? And I believe that the virtual, the way that we're doing everything like we are today via Zoom and other video chats, means that I think geography is breaking down a little bit, which means you can use this as an opportunity to increase the number of people you connect to. Now, let me walk through a couple tactical things. I still firmly believe that when I mean connections, I mean one-on-one. So, yes. And by one-on-one, I still encourage all of my founders to get a warm introduction, either through me or through somebody else, to their investor, to the future potential investors. Getting a warm introduction separates you from anybody doing cold calls. Tactic number 2, I try to encourage, and I do this when I've raised money, I don't want to send my deck before I meet. And I know a lot of investors want to see your pitch deck beforehand. My view is you are the best person to sell you and your company. And I don't want to give that gold away by putting it in a document, a PDF. Mm-hmm. So that to the greatest extent possible, I want to meet one-on-one with people. Virtual coffees, in-person coffees when we're back to that. I want them to see me and see my excitement and connect with me on a human level. So those are 2 important things that I would encourage founders to do. And I think the advantage today is that since everyone's virtual, you should be able to break down geographic barriers and just increase the number of connections you're making to potential investors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you never read a pitch deck before you meet the founder?
If they send it to me, I'm going to read it. But as a founder, I don't want to send it. I might give them a couple paragraph email to get them, but I want to hold my goal till I can talk about it. I don't want them to read the pitch deck for their first impression as a founder. As an investor, I'm okay not seeing the deck beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I hope everyone.
How about you? How about you? Do you require a pitch deck before you meet with someone?
We don't require, but I think majority of times people do send it. I mean, a lot of other things match, like you said, like warm intros, and as well, of course, personal connections and things like this. But with the decks, here people normally send a PDF or a presentation with with information on the startup. That's really interesting. What you say, and how you say, yeah.
Terézia, if you see me and the rest of the people listening, I am a very energetic, right? I'm not faking this. This is me during the day. I want that energy to be my first impression.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do that if you just send a deck. So I might be biased to my personality, but I want them to see how exciting this is. I want them to hear me explain something, not some words that I've written on a PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Normally, what we tell founders is, to take those first few minutes to actually introduce themselves before introducing the startup, because a lot of them, just come there and they really want to tell like what the huge problem there is in the world and what a great solution they've made. And I'm like, just hold on for 3 minutes and say why you are, the one sitting here. And it seems like very basic advice, but actually a lot of founders don't do that from my experience.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's one of my little pet peeves is when I sit down with someone the first time, they immediately start going into the business. I always say, slow down. Tell me about you. Tell me, like, again, back to the first question you asked, I want to connect with you on a human level. Where are you from? Did you go to school? What kind of family do you have? Why does this thing, I always try to, give me a couple minutes about you before you dive into the business.
Yeah, great. So actually, when we are about presenting personalities, I read your article that you've written recently about the bad pitch personalities. It was really funny. You named these 7 bad pitch personalities that you often see. Actually, in every one of them, I could literally see a founder sitting in front of me, and sometimes even remembering the company. I know it sounds really bad, but I mean, that's really something that also sticks in your head. So, even though I think it was very, very useful and you highlighted what these personalities are missing or what they should add or what they should work on, my question is that what do you tell them, or how do you tell them that, this is the problem? And if there is actually a chance for a second date with you, is it even happening?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, the previous story I told where I say, stop. Let me get to know you a little bit better. Once someone's going to do their pitch, I don't want to be the person who, throws a hand grenade in the middle of that. I'm going to let you kind of finish it your way. I may not be inspired by it. It may actually hurt you, but I'm not going to kind of have you recraft this mid-pitch, right? And so, to be honest with you, I spend probably more of my time coaching entrepreneurs about how to pitch than being pitched these days. And so, I put stuff out there so that people can learn. And I think, as a first-time founder, there's so much nuance and little details and things that you just don't know yet. This is why I love, programs like this and Techstars and Y Combinator and every, co-working spaces and all our entrepreneurial tribe is a way for you as a first-time founder to learn the game quicker than you might have on your own. And so, I don't know, now I'm off on a tangent, but just understand, how to be authentic, be you. Tell me about you, and then don't try to put on a suit that's not yours, right? And because again, it's back to human connections, right? That's what the best investments to me are made when the investor and the founder or the founding team really connect on a dimension that they think alike, they have the same attitudes. That's when that's when hopefully you'll find an investor that wants to invest, is because they've connected with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So once you actually meet the founder, you laugh and you feel like there is a good connection with him, and you believe in his leadership skills, and the product is not perfect, is it still a match? You still believe that you can work on a product?
Yeah, so great question. So, back to your first question, how much is the founder and how much is the technology, product, market? And people like to ask the question, like, which one do you value the most? And what I say, it's more like a set of gates for me. So I want to get past the human gate. And once I get past the human gate, then I'll dive into understanding the product and the market potential and how you're thinking about attacking that. And obviously, if I think you're a great entrepreneur, but I think you have a crappy idea, I'm not going to invest. I gotta love the product and service and the market that you're after. And usually, because I'm mostly at the seed level, I'm looking for ways to figure out how you're going to find product market fit. After that, if I'm doing a later stage investment, I'm going to figure out if you understand and you have the team together to scale this business in the right way. I gotta love the product and the market at least a little, right? And because I find myself to be and I think most of the people at Techstars find themselves to be a value add investor. So I can value add if I can connect you with people that you haven't been able to connect with, open up customers, right? Find people for you that add to your team that hopefully help you make better decisions. So I do have to like kind of the market space or the product to some minimal level.
So you said it's a relationship, and it's like dating. So does it ever happen that, one side falls in love and the other don't, which I know happens from, the side of investor and startup, but does it also happen the other way around?
Of course. Just like those relationships, we fall out of love, right? And some of them work out okay and some of them don't work out okay. And sometimes you find ways to part amicably. I never believed that because of that, I need to kind of, do negative things to the founder or the team. I just go quiet, and it's time for you to find date other people. If we kind of keep running with this metaphor, it's bound to happen in many cases. I made about 50 seed investments over the last few years through my own accelerator, and not all of those were, love at the end of our accelerator programs, because you find out that people have different ways to go forward. And I may still love the product. I still may make introductions. I just maybe not put all my time into it when you don't. If you don't need me, then I'm not going to force myself in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, clear. Sorry, I just saw a question here on Slido, so I'm seeing if I can connect this to our discussion. Can you please explain a little bit more what is your role regards to Techstars now? So maybe about your current role and what you're doing at Techstars exactly.
Sure. So a few years ago, working with Techstars executives, I had spent the last 10 years and still involved in building my startup community as running an accelerator, as an investor, as a mentor, running lots of programs, helping get co-working spaces stood up in my town of Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. We've had great success building that startup community and that ecosystem. And with that, I had gotten to know the Techstars folks pretty well. And a few years ago decided that, we wanted to take the workings in this Brad Feld's Startup Communities book, which is coming up on about 8 years old. And kind of a book that many people have used to say, how do I build my community in small cities, medium-sized cities, large cities? And so we built over the last 3 years, we built a new kind of business practice, figuring out how to help economic development folks, government folks, universities, champions, investors, banks, corporations come together in their specific city and say, how can we better work together to build a more robust startup community, to encourage more entrepreneurship, to help them on that journey, to figure out the capital needs, the culture changes, the talent that's needed, and how to bring all that together. So we have a pretty strong point of view about how that happens. And on a consulting basis, we go in and help people, champions, like again, from all of those different places. We help consult with them and coach them and give them help in helping to build their specific startup communities. And we've done that in small places in the US. You know, we've done it in Taiwan and Lima, Peru, and we continue to do that as something to add on to our accelerator. So sometimes we do that before the accelerator comes. Usually by the time we're putting an accelerator in the city's mature enough that they don't need so much of our help. But we do lots of assessment and coaching about where your city's at and how do you go forward. And that's been my, it's kind of my new startup over the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay, I see. Yeah, actually, because you started managing VC funds in like early 90s, sorry, I mean, if I remember correctly from your biography. So I was just wondering, like, you know, you've been in that for quite some time. So has your view on, you know, looking at companies and startups actually changed to like your role now at Techstars? Like, did something change and now you're looking at it differently, or how did it evolve?
Sure. Well, I still do some personal investments. I certainly have done, you know, mostly in my region because it's mostly seed level. You know, Techstars is an amazing company, right? I mean, we're operating, you know, upwards of close to 50 accelerators all over the world, 300 employees all over the world, helping to stand up startup weekends, you know, 1,000 a year. So our footprint is amazing. And in that footprint, one of the key principles of Techstars is our belief that that networks, back to those relationships, that we build unbelievable networks with our companies that go through our accelerator, startup weekend participants. We connect people every day to help them on their journey to building a great company. And we also do plenty of investments, not only in the accelerator, but in companies post-accelerator, right? We have a number of venture funds, you know, multiple $100 million venture funds that invest in our best companies that come out of our accelerator. Through all that, you know, I might be an old guy and I might have done lots of things in my lifetime. You never stop learning. You never, you know, stop, you know, being curious about how things are working. And so to answer your question, do I continue to change and see things differently? You bet, right? Even COVID has changed everything, right? How we connect with people, how we build meaningful connections, to your questions you've asked, right? How do founders raise money in a COVID world? You know, I doubt we'll go back to exactly the way it was a year ago. So how do we prepare founders? And then that's what I care about. The thing I care most about, and I use, you know, I use Techstars as a vehicle for that. I do it myself. How do I encourage more entrepreneurs to take the leap and hopefully help them be more successful? Because it's an amazing thing to be part of.
Yeah. Cool. I think I would go more into asking some practical tips on the startups from our region, as Future Now is also focused on you know, it's a competition of CEE startups. So I'm well, first question would be like whether you actually recognize a category of CEE, meaning Central Eastern Europe startups, or do you actually meet founders from this region? Do they approach you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I, most of my time these days are spent evangelizing about entrepreneurship, evangelizing about how cities and corporates and government and universities and investors can all come together to create, you know, a better outcome. So I do a lot of what we're doing today, right? You know, and use my success and my position to evangelize and to teach and coach and, you know, cajole and poke and nudge people to do more good things. I also have, and happy to have you guys put this up. I also hold open office hours. I do them every week for an hour and a half. They're 20 minutes each, and I'll meet with anybody. You schedule it on my website at my last name, Heivly.com. And sometimes they're booked a couple weeks in advance. I do 3 to 4 every week. And the more of these I do, the more I'm talking to entrepreneurs in different places all over the world. And I don't curate or figure out, I don't know who I'm going to meet with till I turn the video on, right? And most of them are founders, which is what I enjoy. Mm-hmm. So I would expect after this that I would have at least 3 or 4 people reach out from Central Europe, and we'll get 20 minutes together and I'll listen to what you have in mind. And first you'll tell me about yourself for a few minutes, and then we'll talk about the business, and then I'll ask a simple question. How can I help you? What's troubling you? Are you stuck somewhere? What's your next challenge, and how can I help?
That's really great you say that. I hope your inbox will boom from Central and Eastern European startups tomorrow. Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes it feels like for startups from our region, it seems somehow really far, to fundraise with the US investors. And often the question we have is actually, whether it makes sense for them to go fundraise with the US investors if their target market is US, or if it's okay if they fundraise with European investors. So do you have a specific view on this, or maybe an advice what they should do if they're looking to expand into US, if they know it's their target market?
Yeah, so let me just first qualify this by saying this is one opinion, and you shouldn't take my opinion as being the gospel, right? Because every situation is unique. But generally, it depends on what stage you are in fundraising. If you're kind of in the seed level, a couple $100,000 or less, for the most part, that has to be more local or regional. Most kind of seed investors in the U.S. only invest in their local areas. Now, I don't know if or when COVID might change all that, but traditionally, for me, I only invest in places that I can actually get in a car and go meet someone at the seed level. Okay, so at that first, friends and family to kind of seed level, maybe kind of semi-professional investor type. Those typically have to be a little bit more local or regional in the past. Now, when you get to maybe your Series A, maybe you're raising $1 million plus, and those are more what I would call institutional investors. They're either corporations or venture funds, right, that have been set up. Typically, those will start to, operate outside their locale. So you might find, I mentioned like getting to London, right, or Berlin. And so my guess is that unless a large U.S. Investment firm has opened an office in Europe, or you are so far advanced, you have 5 or 10 million AAR, right? Like you're really scaling up. My feeling today would be a little hard pressed to find a U.S. investor until you get to a certain size. That line maybe is going to be different for different folks, for different organizations, but this is all why you need to have 40, 50, 80 contacts for you to determine, for you and your company and where you're at, where's the investor appetite for where I'm at right now. And the best way to do that is go out and talk to as many investors as possible, US, European, local, seed, friends and family, whatever it is, and get the lay of the land. Because the answer is a combination of all those things. You, your company, the state, where you're located, right? This time period. So it's gonna, that answer will be different for everyone. But generally, the things I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And in your accelerators that you're running, is it mainly US companies or is it a combination of all regions?
So when we run accelerators all over the world, I believe we have, they come and go, but I think we have at least 2 or 3 in London and Berlin, and there's one in Torino, Italy, and there's so many, I can't even remember them all. And there's ones in Asia, and Europe and Asia has been the fastest expansion in our accelerator programs in the last few years. But where they're located has absolutely almost no bearing on the companies that are selected. For instance, we have had an energy one and related to, I think, in Norway. We've had one in Portugal, in Lisbon, and those are usually themed around a certain industry or sector. And the companies that apply to Techstars come from all over the place. We get European companies in the US, we get US companies in Europe, we get Asia companies in operating, going through our accelerator in Europe. It's more based on the theme of that accelerator. And so if you were doing an energy startup, it would be best to go to the Techstars site and look through the 40 or 50 current accelerators when their next applications are open and seeing what themes that they cover. And if you can't figure it out, email me and I'll help you figure it out with you.
Okay, cool. Well, actually, someone else is also asking here in the public. Hi, Chris. Have you spent some time in Europe? If yes, do you see a difference in mindset between between European and US regarding the drive, selling, etc.? Can you comment on that?
What was the last part?
If you see a difference in the drive, the sales, etc.
Yeah. I have spent some time in Europe over the last few years. I've spent a lot of time on airplanes pre-COVID. And, I have opinions strongly held, as they say. So I do outside of the US, I sometimes see startups, early stage companies trying to scale their sales to the US maybe a little sooner than I think they should. As if the US is some magical holy grail that if you crack that, right, your company takes off and zooms like a rocket ship. And, one of the questions you always have as a founder, what's the right pace that I should scale my company at? And I don't know about you, but I like to see that there's a solid foundation of not only understanding product market fit, but I understand how to add sales. I understand how to build a sales team. I understand how to market effectively. And those things are usually done a little closer to home than very far away with completely different cultures. And I like to see a company expand that from a solid foundation of what they know today. And sometimes I think and by the way, I see this a little bit more with Asian companies than European companies, where they're just out of the gates. They're a year or two in, they've gotten some nice local sales and they're like, we got to get to the US. We got to get to the US. And it's like, do you know how to do that? It's a completely different culture. The sales and marketing are going to be completely different. You better have people that have experience in how to do that. So just know that it's not just, build a solid foundation and do it from a position of strength. For a European company, Europe just think of all the different cultures between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, right? You got to figure all that stuff out to be effective. So,
So if you can make a generalization or, make it like more as a tip. So when there are companies who want to launch on the US market, you would at first advise them to test it and get the first customer on their own market to prove their processes and their ability to sell, and then go to the US market, or what would be the process?
Sure. Again, one person's opinion. I'm more of what they call a crawl, walk, run person. I have a methodology. I like to do these things in steps and test and figure things out and then expand. Go in somewhere else, test, figure the things I don't know out, figure out how to land, go small. Now, some people would say, I just raised $10 million, let's do 5 million and go to US. And I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying it's not my approach. I want to take a more methodical, iterative approach to expansion. I think many founders and executive teams think expansion is easy. And I think expansion into other markets is really, really difficult. And success in one does not necessarily equal success in the other. There's nuances, personalities, culture differences, language, the way things operate. I mean, it even exists in the US. Selling into Raleigh-Durham versus selling into New York City are completely different. You need different salespeople with different attitudes, and New Yorkers are a little more angry and more in your face, right? In the South of the US, we're a little more gentlemen, and you have to kind of build relationships. So, that exists everywhere. So my approach is a little more methodical. I think you mentioned like test, do a small landing, find the right people, bounce around, figure out what's different and what works, and find one customer and turn 1 into 3 and 3 into 10, and then you're off and running.
Mm-hmm. And if startups approach you, is this something that they normally work on with you, or do you expect them to have this idea before coming to you?
Remember that most of my activity has been more at the seed level, and so very much pre-expansion. But I've witnessed it even with some of those startups as they've expanded to other cities in the U.S. from Raleigh-Durham, and I've seen that So I will say that as I've helped just offer my advice, my thoughts, and taking this more methodical approach, I think most of them, as a generalization, have learned that it's really hard, and you have to be really thoughtful about how to do expansion without wasting time and money.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's clear. I mean, I know you cannot make a generalization about it, but I think it works and it's clear. One question that I also often see, startups also get a bit tired from the fact that everyone expects them to be the unicorns, and they ask me, or they ask my colleagues investors, like, well, what if I know I'm not going to be that $1 billion company? Is it okay if I go fundraise? So what do you tell them?
Yes. I think any investor that's operating at seed or Series A who is expecting every one of their investments to turn into a unicorn is a fool. There's so many more pivots left as you scale your company. Pivots that you don't even know yet. Markets that open up that you couldn't even imagine. Product pivots that all of a sudden expand in an area that you couldn't even imagine. That's why this is a journey. That's why I like founders and entrepreneur and executive teams that are always curious and looking and trying and tempting, and because you don't know the answer. If there was one path, we'd all be on it. So if an investor is saying, is this going to be a unicorn? My answer would be maybe, don't know. And if you know, let me know, because no one knows that answer, right? Unicorns are unicorns because they're very few. There's not many. And what I would say is, listen, as a founder, I don't know how big this company can get. I just know that we have a really good idea with a really good product or service and a really interesting market. And once we land that, we'll figure out where we go from there. And that's what you're investing in, is our ability to figure that out as we go.
Yeah. I think what they often feel is that they, are afraid that the investor will consider them as, not ambitious enough, or, not a dreamer enough, or whatever. So I think they just come for confirmation, is it okay if I know that I want to be the largest local player in the region, but, I don't aim to become that and that you see in the magazines. So it's a bit sad and scary on the other side when I actually hear this question from the founders, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about that more while you were chatting, Terézia. And what I would say is, as a founder, I would never admit that I want to make a small company. Because as an investor, you've just turned the investor off, right? Remember that it's really simple. An investor is going to give you $1 in the hopes that you'll give them $3 to $5 to $10 back someday. And that only happens when your company gets so big. Don't expect to take money from someone and not expect you to grow the company to a size where that return can happen. So I would never limit myself. I would say, listen, I'm not exactly sure where this goes. We have some ideas about how this can become a really big company. But for now, we're going to put our heads down and focus on nailing this locally, right? And then our expansion plan is to figure out the model, get product market fit, and then we'll expand from there. And I think there's lots of opportunities. And here's 4 or 5 of them. But I can't guarantee it's going to be a unicorn. There's things left to be unknown. But I would never say, I just want to keep this to be a little company here in Torino, Italy, right? That's all I want. As soon as you've done that, every investor will run away.
Yeah, sure. So that actually comes with the next group of questions I have prepared in terms of exits as well, because that also goes with future planning and having an ambition of where you actually want to go with your company, and how you want to end up. I think if I can generalize a little bit, in this region we are lacking the exits. I mean, the market is still quite young when talking about, Slovakia or maybe the region. So it's still taking some time until, it matures and their companies are actually being sold or, go IPOs. So I think we are missing a little bit the success stories. While today there was an exit of this Slido that we're actually using for our questions. So congratulations, the Slido guys, for this. It's a big one in our country. Acquired by Cisco, one of the largest technology players, actually. So I'm not sure if you can relate to this, but maybe what would be your advice to the entrepreneurs in terms of exits planning, or maybe thinking of how to find the exits and maybe how to process with this?
Great question. And this gets to the mindset and the kind of, mature entrepreneur mindset that sometimes developing regions don't have yet. I personally hate when someone puts in their pitch their exit slide, because nobody knows that that's even a possibility. Here's the clear thing. Here's all you have to think and say. My goal is to build a great big company. And if I build a great big company, opportunities will present themselves. And I'm not going to be standing in the way of those opportunities. But first, I need to build a really valuable company. Doesn't even have to be big. What's big? Revenue, number of employees? I'm going to build a very valuable company, right? That's my goal. And if you keep your heads down as a founder, executive team, CEO, whatever, if you keep your head down and continue to build and scale your company, exit opportunities will present themselves. But to try to optimize or coordinate an exit, that only happens to the most mature companies. You got a long way to go between starting and that stage, right? I don't know how long Slido was in business. My guess, it's not an overnight success.
Yes. So not to present an exit slide in front of you and your team.
Not me. I think it's silly.
No, sure, I understand. And it's also a good tip, and I think it shows your view and how you look at companies and what you want to make. So it's a good advice, I think. Maybe one more question that now I'm dealing with a lot is the gender gap when it comes to investors as well as founders. And I really have to ask you this because I'm closely watching the data when it comes to VC investors in the US and Europe. The numbers are really bad everywhere. I would say under 10% of women VCs, and that closely relates to women founders. The statistics, I mean, clearly show that. So, and I know you are working a lot with communities and actually helping startup communities to develop. So, what is your stake, and what do you do, maybe personally or within Techstars, to actually include these female founders and maybe motivate more females to run their companies and to go and fundraise?
Yeah, Terézia, it's a huge issue, and it's not just a problem, it's a lost opportunity. Let's start with founders. To think that successful founders only are 25 to 35-year-old white males with computer science degrees is ridiculous. And as an investor, as a community, as a startup enthusiast supporting all your founders, you're basically cutting off half your market opportunities, half your deal flow when you don't recognize female founders or founders of color or founders that aren't educated, in college, right? Founders come from all different places. And in fact, great communities proactively reach out and find ways of bringing non-traditional founders, by definition being, middle-aged white males, right? And not just being, yes, we're open, but proactively reaching out. We have startup weekends just for women, right? I live in a town, Durham, North Carolina, that does not have any racial majority, right? 40% white, 40% black. We run programs, our community is intertwined. We don't see any difference, but it's taken years and still takes a lot of work to be inclusive and to proactively embrace diversity, right? You can't just sit and say, I'm open to diversity. You, as an individual, have to make sure you do your part by connecting, right? Back to the network, connecting people and making sure that your startup community is as diverse as possible. The investor thing will take even longer. And we're trying our best to do things to support with our own funds, women-run venture firms, and this is an individual mandate as well as company mandate. Unfortunately, some of these things are generational, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Like your startup, we have to have the urgency of tomorrow and the patience to let it play out, right? But I put it on every single person, and each of us individually, to say, what can I do to create a network, to put myself in position to connect with people that are not exactly like who I look like. And once you start, you'll notice a difference within months when you, as an individual, connect with lots of people. So, find all venture funds, ask them why they have no women at their, at the partner level, right? Ask them what they're doing, interview them and question them as actively as they're questioning you. And with time, this will change. I mean, I have seen a lot of change in the last 2 years, but there's a lot more left to do.
Yeah, exactly. I agree that there is a lot happening and there's still a lot to change. And I agree also with what you said, that it's a lot of individual efforts that need to take place at first. Well, thank you for this. I think we are nearly coming to an end, so I'm just trying to look at our audience of their questions that we haven't answered yet. Maybe we could end with the one that looks into the future and is asking you, what are the next trends according to you in the startup world for the upcoming future?
Yeah, that's my least favorite question. The trend that I care most about is, I think we're going to see an explosion, and have been seeing in Europe and Asia, of new entrepreneurs, and maybe eventually Africa and South America. Some of it's happening in South America, but certainly Europe and Asia, the more Western countries. And I think we're seeing that this is being able to start a company, having that personal freedom, and not assuming that there's only limited economic means for you to kind of how to work and do those things. And I think we'll continue to see that. I think the opportunities will only grow. I think that this virtual kind of COVID and post-COVID world where people connect more in video ways will even further break down the geographic limitations. And I think with that trend of more and more founders and entrepreneurs in more and more places, that will diversify our economy to the point where big economic shifts will not kind of crush or hurt your city, your region, or your country. And out of that, I would end by saying I think entrepreneurship is everywhere. And if you're a good entrepreneur, you can find success regardless of what city, town that you live in. And I only think that's going to continue over the next, as far as I see, 5 to 10 years.
Nice. I think it's a great dot to this discussion. Thank you so much, Chris, for inspiring us, for inspiring me and all our audience. It was really great talking to you and hearing your views and your approach to, looking at each founder individually and just, looking at the story as such. It was great talking to you.
It was nice meeting you. My pleasure. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And reiterate, if you'd like to reach out, heivly.com, contact me, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.